Formula One just pulled the trigger on a rule change so late, teams cannot even go back and test it. Pre-season testing is over. The cars are locked in. Millions have already been spent. And days before the Australian Grand Prix, the FIA tightens the 2026 regulations. No low-drag straight mode at the race start. Stricter active aero control mid-lap. Energy deployment limits cut after simulations showed speed differences of over 60 km per hour between cars. That is not a tweak. That is a power shift. If one team built its entire concept around aggressive energy release and razor-thin aero timing, this announcement just erased part of their advantage overnight. Drivers pushed for safety. Engineers pushed for performance. The FIA stepped in. And someone on that grid just lost more than they are willing to admit. Stay with me, because what Formula One just announced before Australia could decide who controls the next era, before the first lights even go out. Subscribe now, because Melbourne will expose exactly who this change hurts the most. Pre-season testing ended with a false sense of certainty. 3 days in Bahrain. Long runs. Qualifying simulations. Fuel loads disguised. Engine modes hidden. Teams left the desert believing they understood the competitive order. They believed they knew who was efficient, who was aggressive, who was vulnerable. And then the announcement landed. Because testing is not just about lap times. It is about behavior. Engineers study acceleration traces corner by corner. They analyze when electrical deployment spikes. They measure how long a car can sustain low drag configuration before stability drops. If one team looked unusually comfortable inside the gray areas of the 2026 framework, that becomes obvious in the data. And that is what makes this timing so significant. The FIA did not act before testing. They acted after. After they saw real-world numbers. After they reviewed telemetry. After drivers voiced concerns about extreme closing speeds and braking instability. That tells you something. Because the biggest adjustment is not cosmetic. Removing low-drag straight mode at race starts changes the entire first-lap dynamic. In previous simulations, cars could launch with reduced drag, reaching the first braking zone at extreme velocity. Now, they must start in maximum downforce configuration. More grip. More stability. But less raw speed. That alone reduces chaos into turn 1. But it also removes an aggressive tool some teams were counting on. And then comes the deeper layer. Active aerodynamics are now governed by stricter lateral G thresholds. If the car senses significant cornering force, the low drag configuration closes automatically. Earlier than before. That eliminates the temptation to stretch the window through high-speed corners. Which means less performance extracted from borderline transitions. And if someone mastered that transition during testing, their advantage just shrank. Energy deployment may be the most critical change of all. The new overtaking system was producing alarming deltas in simulation. Over 60 km per hour difference between a fully charged car and one depleted. That is not competitive nuance. That is imbalance. So activation thresholds were tightened. Maximum deliverable energy per lap was adjusted. Post-race electrical checks intensified. This forces teams to smooth their deployment curves. No more dramatic peaks. No more extreme late straight surges. Now here is the psychological element. When a governing body intervenes this early in a regulation cycle, it signals vigilance. It tells teams that pushing gray areas will trigger immediate refinement. That changes development philosophy. Engineers become more cautious. Risk tolerance drops. But the teams that can adapt fastest gain an invisible advantage. Because pre-season testing is finished. There is no additional validation window. No second rehearsal. Everything must now be recalibrated through simulation alone. Australia becomes the first real stress test of this tightened framework. Not just for speed. For adaptability. Which car remains stable when low drag windows are shorter? Which power unit delivers energy efficiently under stricter limits? Which driver feels confident attacking braking zones without straight mode assistance? That is what Melbourne will reveal. And if a team that looked dominant in Bahrain suddenly appears slightly restrained, it will not be coincidence. It will be consequence. But there is another consequence nobody is talking about loudly. Momentum. In Formula One, the first race of a new regulation era is not just about points. It is about narrative. If a team dominates round 1, the story begins immediately. Sponsors react. Investors react. Rival teams feel pressure instantly. And pressure changes decision-making. So by tightening the 2026 framework before Australia, the FIA has essentially frozen that first impression. They have reduced the probability of an extreme performance gap appearing on debut. That protects the show. It protects competitive balance. But it also disrupts anyone who believed they had discovered something special in testing. Because let's be honest, when engineers spend years interpreting new regulations, they are hunting for gray zones. Not illegal areas. Interpretative ones. Small windows in wording. Tiny allowances in thresholds. The removal of straight mode at the start may sound like a safety tweak, but it changes launch maps. It changes torque delivery calibration. It changes how aggressively drivers attack the first sector. And if one car was built to maximize that launch phase, the advantage evaporates before the lights even go out. The stricter lateral G logic for active aero also alters rhythm. Drivers were learning how far they could stretch the transition between low drag and high downforce. Now the system intervenes earlier. That means different braking points. Different balance mid-corner. Less risk, but also less opportunity. Energy deployment is perhaps the most strategic battlefield of all. With the new limits on activation and per lap delivery, overtakes become more calculated. No more overwhelming late straight surges. No more massive speed delta shocks. Which means racecraft regains importance. But it also means a team that engineered its concept around aggressive battery deployment loses part of its weapon. And remember something critical. Pre-season testing is over. The garages are closed. There is no opportunity to validate these changes under identical desert conditions. Everything must now be simulated. And simulations are not perfect. Track temperature shifts. Wind direction changes. Traffic variables alter energy recovery. Australia is a street circuit. Bumpy. Unforgiving. Low margin for error. If the recalibrated software behaves unpredictably under braking, confidence disappears quickly. So this first race is not just about speed. It is about trust. Does the driver trust the wing to close at the right moment? Does the team trust the energy map to stay within new limits? Does the strategist trust that overtaking windows still exist under reduced deltas? That is why this announcement feels bigger than the words on paper. It introduces uncertainty at the worst possible moment. Right before lights out. And in Formula One, uncertainty is dangerous. Because the team that handles uncertainty best often walks away with the biggest advantage when everyone else hesitates. Australia will not just show who is fastest. It will show who adapted, who recalculated, who absorbed the shock without losing confidence. And that may define far more than just the opening weekend. It may define the tone of the entire 2026 era. And here is the final layer that makes this announcement feel almost strategic rather than reactive. Because when the FIA tightens regulations before the first race, they are not only correcting risk. They are shaping the future narrative of the sport. 2026 is supposed to be the clean reset. New power balance. New aerodynamic identity. New manufacturers stepping into the spotlight. Audi preparing its full entry. Ford aligning with Red Bull. Honda continuing its involvement. Major automotive brands tying their reputation to this regulation cycle. If one team had emerged from Bahrain with a visible, repeatable advantage in energy deployment or aero transition timing, the entire commercial story of the new era could have tilted immediately. Dominance at the start of a cycle is powerful. It creates belief. It attracts talent. It shifts investment focus. The FIA understands that. So instead of waiting for Australia to confirm a potential imbalance, they adjusted the boundaries early. Not rewriting the rules. Just tightening the interpretation. Which is often more impactful. Because interpretation is where the smartest teams operate. Now think about what this means for development going forward. If engineers know that pushing the gray area too aggressively triggers instant clarification, their approach changes. They become more cautious. More incremental. But at the same time, the most advanced organizations will not slow down. They will simply become more discreet. Which means innovation will not disappear. It will become subtler. Harder to detect. Harder to regulate. And that creates a fascinating tension moving into Australia. We are about to see cars that were designed under one set of operating assumptions, now competing under a slightly refined framework. No redesigns. No dramatic bodywork changes. But significant software recalibration. Energy curves reshaped. Aero activation windows shortened. Overtake threshold softened. And in modern Formula One, software is performance. So the first laps in Melbourne will tell a story that testing could not. If overtakes look more measured than predicted. If straight-line speed gaps appear narrower. If the first lap feels less chaotic than simulations suggested. Then the FIA's intervention achieved its goal. But if one car still looks effortlessly balanced, still looks efficient, still looks adaptable under the tightened limits, then we will know something even more powerful. That the advantage was not dependent on gray areas at all. It was structural. And that possibility is what makes this so compelling. Because sometimes rule changes do not eliminate dominance. They expose who built the strongest foundation in the first place. Pre-season testing is finished. The data has been analyzed. The framework has been refined. Now comes the real experiment. Australia will not just start a championship. It will reveal whether this late intervention leveled the field, or simply confirmed who was already ahead under any interpretation of the rules.